This is the On All Cylinders podcast,
presented by Summit Racing.
Your hosts this week are Summit Racing's Al Noe and David Fuller, with special guest Jay Leno.
Here we go.
Thanks for being with us on the inaugural On All Cylinders podcast. We look forward to having Jay Leno join us today. But before we get started, we are powered by Summit Racing Equipment. So we have a very special guest to start off, Brian Nutter from our Summit Brands department. Brian, tell us a little bit about what you do with the Summit brand line, and just tell us a little bit about the Summit brand line itself.
Well, first off, it's the coolest job in existence. We talk with our customers a lot about things that they need to get their cars put together. You know, and we cover a lot of ground. I mean, it's anything from paint and body work. We sell a lot of really high quality paint made in the USA. All the tools you need to put stuff together. You know, we see places where a tool is needed to make your life easier, and it's just like, well, let's work with our engineers to create these things and bring them to market. And yeah, it is all over the map, the types of things that we have under our brands here.
Well, we thank you for being a part of the inaugural On All Cylinders podcast as well.
Oh, it's an honor.
Thanks. Now I'm going to throw it over to my co-host, Al.
My name's Al Noe with Summit Racing. Our guest today is Jay Leno. Jay's joining us from his garage in California. And Jay, on behalf of the Summit Racing team, we cannot thank you enough for taking the time to spend with us today.
Got a lot of time to talk cars these days. There's not much else to do but sit around and talk cars. So it works out pretty good.
On that topic, how's your 2020? How did you navigate through? And just talk a little bit about the importance of having a hobby like this.
Well, things didn't really change for me. I usually just come to the garage. I mean, obviously, I had over 200 personal appearances canceled, so I'm not on the road. So I just come to the garage, and I like to work on my stuff. And, you know, it's interesting because when you work in a field like show business or something where you're using your head, and to come in and work with your hands is very satisfying. It gives you a sense of proportion, you know. When you take a transmission out and you realize some guy probably made $80 for that and his hands are all cut and bleeding, and you realize it makes you appreciate how easy it is to make money in show business, you know. So it's fun. You know, I'm one of those people who believes when the head and the hands work together, that's when the heart is healthiest. And so in the day, you sort of work with your hands, and at night, I go out and tell jokes or do whatever it is like that. And it's just a nice balance. I enjoy it. My life has not really changed a whole lot because I'm usually here all the time anyway. I'm either, you know, I do the Tim Allen show, Last Man Standing, and the Jay Leno's Garage show and the YouTube show and a few other things. So the only thing that's really different is the personal appearances have stopped. There just aren't any. But so I come back here, and actually I fixed a bunch of things I thought I would never get to. You know, I have an old 8-liter Bentley over there, and it has a crankshaft pulley that spun. It broke the key. Now, any other car, you know, like a V8, you open the hood, you take out the radiator, you pull the crankshaft pulley. Well, on the Bentley, the crankshaft goes through the cross member, the end of the crankshaft, and the pulley's on the inside. You have to you have to take the body off to get to the crankshaft pulley. Luckily, we were able to fix it with some shims and some red Loctite, and the keyway had come loose, so the thing was rocking and chewing itself up, you know. So that was good. So just a lot of projects like that, stuff you go, oh man, this is a nightmare. Let me just put it in the corner. I've got a 1942 Jeep Army issue. It's a Ford-built Willys, and spun the bearings on it. So we just actually that was pretty easy. We did that in a day. We called a couple of Jeeps up like Roy Fitzgerald and go, actually everything's okay. Can't complain.
So Jay, when you look back on your career and your automotive passion, how did you get started? What age were you? When did you see like the first car? And what was the first thing that you saw that just got you interested in this hobby? And what started?
Well, I was always into anything that sort of rolls, explodes, and makes noise. I came home from the hospital in a 49 Plymouth. We had that till I was 7 years old. Then my dad bought a 57 Belvedere. And I used to sit in his lap and, you know, hold the steering wheel going down the street. Now, of course, nowadays they arrest your father and put him in prison for child abuse. But back then it was fairly common. You sit in your dad's lap and blow the horn and hold the steering wheel. So I always liked cars and motorcycles. And I went through the usual go-kart stuff and all that kind of thing. But I remember, this is kind of a funny story. I grew up in Andover, Massachusetts, which is about 20 miles south of the New Hampshire border. And one day I'm riding my riding my bicycle rather, in Ballard. Andover had another section called Ballardvale, which is kind of like, I don't say the lower class part, but the other side of the tracks, put it that way. So I'm riding my bicycle, I come up the hill, I get to the top of the hill, and I see this 1951 Jaguar XK120 with the spats on it, and I went, oh my God, look at that. And I saw this, what I thought was an old man polishing it, you know. So I looked at it, and the guy said, oh, you like this car? And I thought, oh, yeah. So you want to sit in it? Okay. So he calls me over, and he lets me sit in it. And I'm like, oh, man, this is really cool. That stuck with me. And the first sort of collector car I bought when I made some money was a 1954 Jaguar XK120. But I never forgot sitting in that car. And I told that story one day, I think on The Tonight Show, back in the late 90s, early 2000s. And I get a letter from a guy in San Francisco who says, hey, you know that guy whose car you sat in? He still owns it. I go, what? He must be dead. He's an old man now. He was an old man then. Well, it turns out at the time the guy was only 24, but I was 9. so I just thought he was like 50 or 60. You know? So I go, what? He's still alive? He goes, yeah, he still lives in the same house, the same place. Oh. Here's his number. I know him. This guy went to school. And okay, so I'll call him up. And I guess what is he? So he's 14 years. What is he? Whatever that is. How many years old? It's a good I'm at math. So I call him up, and next time I go back home, I go to visit him, and the car is in the same barn. This is what's great about back east. People put stuff away, and it just sits. And it was just amazing to me. I had this thing in my head that he was an old man, and he let me sit in his car. But he was only 24 at the time. So that's kind of where I got started. Plus, it was also an era growing up in the 60s primarily when, like, my mom knew nothing about a car, but you knew when a Valiant wouldn't start, you take off the round thing, take a screwdriver down the little smaller round thing, open that so the flap opens, get in, turn the key. So people had some sort of cursory knowledge of cars. It's not like today where engines are pretty much sealed and you can't do anything. So plus it was the era of the muscle cars and music, and cars were sort of cool. Even kids who knew nothing about cars pretended to, because the music was all influenced by cars and all that kind of thing. So it was a good time to grow up and be interested in automobiles.
Yeah, well, I think it's certainly a challenge getting the next generation or the current generation back interested in cars. Definitely a different time. So what keeps you so interested in cars in general? I mean, you work on them, you obviously have a ton of history on them, and obviously driving them is fun. What's your favorite aspect of just owning all these different cars?
Well, I like the whole aspect of it. I like the story behind it. The car was sort of the iPhone of the day. Kids now go places virtually. In our day, the car was your escape. That's what your car took you from point A to point B. Like, I was 7 miles from uptown. I remember the worst day of my life being 15 and a half. And my buddies who were 16 all had cars. Hey, we'll see you uptown. Okay. I'm riding my bike. By the time I get uptown, everybody's gone. Everybody's left. It's like that was the worst age to be, because some of your friends had cars and you didn't have a license yet. But, I was one of those kids. I was at the DMV when I was 15 and 9/9, just waiting for the clock to hit 12 so I could go in and get my license. It was a different time. It's interesting. I find kids are interested in the new technology. Like, I find a lot of young people who are not car people fascinated by electric cars. It's a bit like rock and roll and rap. It's still music. It's just not the music you grew up with. It might not be the music you like, but it's still music. So you have to look at it that way. I mean, I meet guys all the time now modifying Teslas or taking, old cars, MGs, whatever, converted into electric. They're faster, they're quieter, they don't pollute. It's just a different ball game. You just sort of have to change with the times, I think.
Jay, what is your opinion of electric vehicles? I'm always interested because, in one way, a lot of younger people don't know the history of the electric vehicle in the United States. And I know you, for example, have, I believe it's a Baker that's from 1900, 1910, somewhere in that era.
Yeah, 1909, a Baker electric. And people are fascinated to learn the electric car came before the gas car. I mean, there was electric cars before we had gas cars. The same problem was the problem we had unto just the last couple of decades, battery technology was not there yet. For new technology to succeed, it can't be equal. It's got to be superior. It's kind of like the Wankel engine. The Wankel engine, well, everybody thought, oh my God, this is going to be the greatest thing ever, the Wankel engine. And it was fast and it was smooth, but it burned oil more than a gas car, and it got about 3 to 5 miles per gallon less than a gas car. So consequently, it did okay, but it never really caught on. And electric cars, up until about 20 years ago, were interesting. If you knew you were going from here to there every day at exactly the same time, okay, I had one of those EVs that one General Motors, the EV1. They let me borrow for a couple of weeks, and I live probably 25 miles from the Tonight Show, my house, something like that. And when I get on the freeway, I'd nail it, and I'd see if mileage would go from 80 to 3. Have I only got 3? I was sweating bullets every time I got to NBC, and that's sort of the problem they never got the range that they promised. In this EV, I would charge it all day at NBC, and I barely had enough energy or electricity to get back to my house. I would get back and the light would come on. I go, well, this electric thing is not going to work. It wasn't until Tesla came along, I think. And I think that, sadly, or whatever you want to call it, is the future. I think a kid born today will probably ride in a gasoline-powered car about as often as a kid today rides in a car with a manual shift. It'll still be there. I've got a Tesla. I bought it in 2015. I've never done anything to it. It's never been to the dealer. It doesn't break. It doesn't need warm-up. It doesn't need fluid change. I suppose I get lazy and change the brake fluid, but even brakes last forever because you're always using regen to slow down. And I think what will happen is that hot rods, Mustangs, Cobras, Ferraris, these will become like snowmobiles. It'll be a vehicle you use on the weekend to have fun, go in the hills and drive around and go to car meets. But during the week, they'll use an electric car to go back and forth. I get on the 101 freeway and it's bumper to bumper. Why should I drive a Hemi Challenger, at 9 to 12 miles an hour down the freeway, getting 6 miles per gallon? It's not fun. So why not use your electrical vehicle for that? And then use your gas car for weekends when you want to have some fun.
You had a chance also to drive in the Tesla truck as well, right?
That was fascinating. But, Elon's quite a guy. When you're a billionaire, a multi-billion, and you own the company, you can do whatever you want. I went over there. I said, come, let's go for a ride in the Tesla truck. So he and I would take the Tesla truck. And it's just like the Tesla car. Very quick, very fast. It's big. And it's interesting, whether you love it or hate it, pickup trucks have looked exactly the same since 1918, with the exception of maybe the Corvair Ramside, where the engine was in the back. But that was a little too wild for most people. It didn't sell. But pickup trucks are like 911s and like Harley Davidsons. They don't change too much. Radical change is not good. And this was a radical change. And consequently, half love it and half hate it. I remember I was talking with Bob Lutz when they introduced the Viper. And I said, how do you feel about, some people thought the Viper looked too cartoony, others loved it. And he goes, well, that's great. He said, I'm not going to sell it to the people that hate it, but the people that love it have to have it and will pay a premium to get it. And that's the idea. You want to have some sort of passion one way or the other. Anyway, so Elon and I take the Tesla truck out for a ride. We're driving around. And I said, hey, how's that boring company working? He's got that boring, it makes the tunnels under Los Angeles. You guys know about that?
Oh, yes.
So he says, oh, the tunnel's not far from here. And then he says to me, do you think the Tesla truck will fit in the tunnel? I go, I don't know. It's your tunnel. So we go to the tunnel and he gets out and we have 1/4 inch on each side, just barely. So we get in this tunnel and we're driving along, and it's like one of those cartoons that you watch, where the machine goes through and makes the tunnel that's perfectly round. And that's basically what this is. So this is a continuing process. He's got about maybe 2 miles of tunnel. So we come to the end of the tunnel. And I go, what do we do? Do we have to back up? He goes, no, we have an elevator here. At each step we go, we take the elevator and we build it. He goes, oh, okay. I go, where do we come up? He goes, I'm not sure. So we get in the tunnel and we come up in some guy's backyard in El Segundo. We come up and I see a broken bike and a Weber grill and, just what everybody has in the backyard. And this guy comes out, hey, Mr. Musk, hey, Mr. Leno, hi, guys. How are you? He goes, sorry, Bob. Eli says, we pay him to use to use his backyard. And we just come up this guy's backyard and we pull out his driveway and we're on some street in a neighborhood in El Segundo. And next month it'll be further on down the road. So that's what's kind of fun, when you billionaires can do whatever they want. I like that sort of American ingenuity. I think he's a very clever guy. When I would watch people go after Tesla and trash it and make fun of it, and I go, why? It's American made with American workers. I mean, it's built 100% right here in California using locally sourced materials. I'm sure there might be some parts from China. There's nothing that isn't. I don't get why people get mad at it or hate it. I don't have kids, but I subsidize schools. I'm not a big sports fan, but my taxes pay for stadiums and everything. So to subsidize a new form of transportation, it doesn't seem that bad to me. People always think if you have one, you're going to lose the other, and it's not. I think we'll be able to enjoy our gasoline-powered cars longer if people who don't care for them drive electric cars, because they'll pollute less and whatnot. I mean, they always say that yes, there's more pollution to build an electric car. That is true. But once the electric car is built, it stops polluting. I mean, a 1977 Ford LTD parked on the street with the ignition off pollutes more than a Tesla going down the road at 80 miles an hour, because the gases, the unvented gas tank, I mean, that's giving off all sorts of things, So it's just something to think about. I mean, you can have both. You can have your electric world and you can have your car world at the same time. One doesn't necessarily negate the other, but we all seem to get in our heads that if you have this, oh my God, this is going to happen. You're going to lose your right to drive. You're going to lose it. I don't believe so.
Jay, I think your observation on that's spot on. And, I went to an autocross challenge last year put on by one of our vendors called the UMI King of the Mountain. And a fella who raced with Akron Sports Car Club, he came to it with a Tesla Model 3. That car was fast.
It's sort of like with truckers, For years, trucks look like big Peterbilts. They look like just non-aerodynamic boxes on top of boxes with a big flat grill. And then I can't remember the company that came out with that sort of aerodynamic-looking truck. Remember, it had that sort of Buck Rogers ray gun looking, and it was like 20% more aerodynamic. And all the truck, what a stupid-looking thing that is. And then it got like 20% better mileage. And then suddenly all trucks look like that now. So if you're going to come up with new technology and new ideas, just make sure they work. But people, like I say, are pretty conservative. They don't like to change too quickly.
Well, Jay, let's talk about a project that I believe that you've been working on for a bit, the Firebird Sprint.
Oh, yeah, that thing is great. This is really interesting to me. Back in the 60s, John DeLorean was enamored of the XKE. He just thought that was the greatest car. And he wanted to build an American XKE. And he went to his bosses at General Motors, and they said, look, build us something to compete with Mustang and whatever. So they did the Firebird. But he still had this XKE thing in the back of his head. So he took the Chevy 6, put a modified cylinder head on it, put an overhead cam on it, driven by a rubber belt. That was sort of the gimmick of the time. It was the first overhead cam production engine built in America since probably the Will St. Clair in 1922. And it had a rubber belt and a few other gimmicks. And it came with a quadrajet and a 4-speed. And they built a model called the Pontiac Sprint, which was 4.1 liter, 6-cylinder overhead cam engine. But the trouble with it is, by the time you put the quadrajet and the headers and all the high performance options on it, it actually costs more than a V8 Firebird. And back in 1967, 68, why would anybody take a 6 over a V8? It made no sense. So they didn't sell very many of them. So in the back of my mind, I looked for years until I found one. And I found one behind me. This guy had ordered it with all the performance options. He was a sailor, a 4-speed, and a convertible. So we've done a bit of retro mod to it. We put 4-wheel brakes, Willward disc brakes on it. We put Hotchkiss suspension, which is fantastic. It's only 220 horsepower, but the emphasis is on the handling. I mean, it really handles like a sports car. We put the 15-inch wheels on it. I'm going to put a little thinner tire. They're a little too thick, and I'm hitting the wheel well when I, come down from over a whoop-de-doo or a bump or something, We put a Tremec TSX in it, that new 5-speed. Boy, that is a great gearbox. You don't realize how good gearboxes are until you get a brand new one. You go, oh my God, this thing just snick. But the real thing I'm most proud of is the trouble with these cars was the oil pressure was kept deliberately on the low side because the rocker arms would soft and would wear the cam. So what we did, we made our own rocker arms out of tool steel. We had them hardened, and then we put a coating on called Diamond-like coating, DLC, I think is the name of it. And then we ran it on the dyno, just flat out, and we couldn't get anywhere on the rocker arms or the cam at all. And we realized, well, this is perfect. So that's what we have in it now. So the emphasis on this car is not necessarily the speed. I mean, it's a lot of fun. It sounds like a 6. It makes a nice noise. It just handles so well. And that's what's sort of fun. And when you go to a car show, people go, oh, what do you got in there, 400? No. And they go, what? Because most people have never even seen that engine. They only did it for a few years in the late 60s and early 70s, an overhead cam Pontiac seat. It's such a strange looking motor with that big giant quadrajet on it. It's a lot of fun, and it's something a little bit different. And I really enjoy it. I'm having a lot of fun with it.
How much fabricating do you do? And is there something typically that on your restoration projects seems like it always needs fabricated because you can't find the part?
That's sort of the problem. We have Fidel machines. We got CNC machines. You got 3D printers. So it's the old adage. You want something done right, you got to do it yourself. Like right now, we're making a bell housing. I've got a 1962 Maserati that I was able to buy a long time ago pretty cheap. And that came with a 5-speed ZF gearbox. But the gearbox is in bad shape. The sync rails are all gone. Just buying new gears, a couple of new gears for ZF, is more than a brand new Tremec THX rather. And the Tremec gearbox is small, it's light, but we have to make our own bell housing. So that's what we're doing now. We're designing it and cutting the bell housing now. You start with a big chunk of metal and you whittle it down. So we're going to put that in there. And a lot of people say, oh, but it's not a Maserati anymore. Good, thank you. That ZF box was terrible. This way it'll be drivable and it'll be fun and it'll be kind of cool.
Jay, one car that I think is amazing, your 55 Buick. It's kind of the car that's been with you through everything.
It was great. It was a good running car. I enjoyed it. I met my wife in that car. I dated my wife in that car. I took the car to my first Tonight Show. And then I parked at my mother-in-law's house. And it often happens, younger, prettier cars came along, and that thing sat for 17 years at my mother-in-law's house. Wow. And I went over to my mother-in-law's one day, and there was a note out saying, somebody obviously doesn't care about this car. I would like to buy it. And I went, oh, no, I care about it. So we got a flatbed. We brought it back to the garage. I spoke to the guys at GM. We got the very first 572 crate motor, the very first ones. And GM made up some valve covers with my name on it, which was kind of funny, and I appreciated that. And we put that in there. We put some C5 Corvette suspension in it. We made our own wheels, and we spun some hubcaps to make it look original. So it originally had 14s in it, so it's got 17s in it now, so you get the big brakes underneath there. So it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun. I love that car, and I'll never sell it. I've had it now, more than 40, almost 50. God, I've had it almost 50 years. I bought it in 72.
Is that the car you've owned the longest, Jay?
Yeah, that's the car I've had the longest. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's the first car I got when I came to California. I didn't set out to collect cars. It just never sold any.
Well, you talked about the Firebird being something you're working on now, and sort of the plan behind that. How do you decide kind of what's next? You have your eye on anything right now?
What else? I've got a Doble steam car that we're redoing. That's another part. There's a lot of broken stuff here because I drive it all and I use it all. I've got a Duesenberg back here with I got a valve sticking, and I keep running seafoam and everything else through the motor, just trying to loosen it up. I don't want to have to take the head off this thing, so I'm just trying to drive and see if it frees itself. It's not terrible. It's just ticking. It drives you crazy. It's like, the telltale heart at Edgar Allan Poe. I can hear it. Nobody else can hear it, Just little problems like that.
Jay, we've had a lot of our customers ask, if you could only keep one of your cars or one of your motorcycles, what would it be?
I mean, I like them all. I guess if I have to pick one greatest American car, I'd have to go with the Duesenberg. I mean, just an amazing motor, making 265 horsepower at a time when 30 or 40 horsepower was considered a lot for a car. I mean, it was the first, I guess, supercar, you could say.
What about motorcycles, Jay? Do you have a favorite motorcycle?
I like Bruff Superiors, and I like Vincent Black Shadows. Incredibly fast, incredibly expensive. But Bruff Superior in 1920 cost the same as a house in London, in England, rather. And they were hand-built and using proprietary parts. You got the best engine. Vincent, I give a little more credit to because he built his own engine, built his own frame, built his own. Bruff Superior found the best parts he could, made the best looking gas tank in motorcycle history. When you see a Bruff, to me, it's the most beautiful bike you could possibly imagine. Especially one from the 20s, very spindly, very lightweight, 55 horsepower in 1920 on a motorcycle was unbelievable. I mean, that was just an unbelievable amount of power. And to go 100 miles an hour when the speed limit was 35, it would be like going 200 today. So I would say the Vincent and the Bruff, but I've got a 36 Harley Knuckle, which is an interesting one, the Knucklehead. You know, the 36 Harley is interesting because when it came out, they didn't make very many of them because they thought it was too technically superior. Had overhead valves, had a 4-speed gear change, had all these things which they thought the average motorcyclist would find this daunting, you know.
Is there one, in terms of engines, one that was most difficult to get a grasp on or learn to work on?
You know, so many different types of. The Duesenberg is pretty. I mean, the Duesenberg, even in the period flat rate manual, adjusting the valves is a 40-hour job. It's that complicated a motor.
I had a friend ask, what is the maddest you've ever gotten at a project or you know, something you're working on in the shop?
Well, I mean, that Bentley keyway on the pulley that I mentioned that's on the inside of the cross member, that sat for 18 months. We just said, oh, God. I mean, first of all, we need the whole shop because you'd have to take the body off it, take the fender. I mean, it was pull the engine up just to get, because even the fan belt, you can't put a fan belt on that car. You've got to have a hook belt, which means a fan belt where you attach it, you put little pieces on to make it longer or shorter. So that was a pretty daunting one. Because, you know, I'm so used to these weird cars, so there are no parts where you have to make them or use a 3D printer. So to find suppliers, you know, even to do it, like here I'm wearing my Fort Wayne clutch and driveline T-shirt on because I love these guys because they're the only guys that can set up a Duesenberg clutch properly. There's nobody else. I haven't found anybody else in the world that can do it. And these guys, I send them my clutch, and they send it back, and I put it in, and it's perfect. I can screw that thing all day long, and I can't get it right.
Jay, you mentioned earlier about events in 2020 getting canceled, appearances getting canceled, et cetera. Hopefully, 2021 will be the year that we can get back to going to races, events, and shows. What are some of the most memorable ones that you've been to?
I mean, I like to go to shows where guys, I like to call them rattle can restorations, where guys, you know, use some Rust-Oleum on the chassis and they restore it in their garage and they hand sand it. And, you know, it looks as good as one of those Pebble Beach restorations because there's so much effort went into it.
So if you had if you're starting out in the hobby and you had like a 10 grand budget, where would you start? What would you look at?
Well, if I had a 10 grand budget, I would look at a Corvair because you can get a 6-cylinder with a 4-speed. It's the most European American car ever built. You know, I have a 66 Corsa. And when I drive it, people say, is that a Carmen gear? Is that a Fiat? No, it's a Corvair. They're a dime a dozen. It's not a particularly sophisticated engine, but you can get a lot of power out of it. And they're a lot of fun. So I would say that. I would say Falcons. I've got a 63.5 Falcon that I love. It's got a 302 with a 5-speed in it. But I would say Corvair would probably be your best bet because you're combining a little bit of sports car with a manual transmission. I would say that's probably one of your best bets for under 10 grand.
Do you have any cars that are left on your list that you look at and say, I got to find one of those?
You know, this Sprint was one of those cars. You know, it's so funny because when you live in Andover, Massachusetts, like I did, any car with less than 4 doors might as well be a Ferrari. I remember a guy named Joe in our town had a 55 Chevy with a 283 with 2 4-barrels. That was an Indianapolis race car. I mean, that was the fastest car in town. It was unbelievable. It was the kind of thing where you go to McDonald's at 8 o'clock at night, hang around, wait for something cool to come by. You go home at 10. When you got home, the phone would ring. Hey, a new Corvette came in. No, I missed it. Oh, it was just a different sort of era.
But obviously you get to work with some celebrities on these cars too. Is there anybody that you were really surprised to find out was a car person or is really knowledgeable?
Kevin Costner, he's a Mustang guy. Who else? I'm trying to think. Seinfeld. Seinfeld's a Porsche guy. John Hamm. I mean, there's quite a few. I mean, cars is one of those secret passions a lot of people have they don't talk about. Idris Elba, he's a huge car guy. Roger Penske, there you go. There's a good one. You know, I was with Roger, and we're in downtown Detroit, and I said to him, I'm stunned at how clean downtown Detroit is. I mean, everything looks nicely taken care of. They've really done a wonderful job. And he started a program where, I think I have this right, he gives homeless people a mailbox with a key so they have an address where they can get mail or they can get checks or whatever like that. And he sets up some kind of food banks around. And all he says to them is, hey, if you're out in the city and you see some trash, we just put it in the trash can. You don't have to, but if you would, I'd appreciate it. I mean, I had to drag that out of him. I was just talking about how clean it was, and then he told me about this program. It's not like he was, trying to brag to me about something he did. Yeah, he's and of course, he's the ultimate car guy. He's my defense guy.
Back when you were a young stand-up comic, did you ever think that you'd be at the place you're at now?
No, I was just lucky to be making a living doing jokes. That never even occurred to me, but which is, I think, a better way to be. I was always happy at whatever level I was at. I'm realistic. I was a terrible student. I'm dyslexic. I never thought I would get this far. And so, I'm a huge believer in low self-esteem. I think if you don't think you're the smartest person in the room, you'll shut up and you'll listen. I like to play with cars. And when I get it over my head, which is every day, the guys jump in and save me. I don't want to pretend that, I've restored all these cars myself. Not even close. I've got guys here that are excellent at what they do, and it's good. We have a good life. Nothing here has to be done on any particular schedule. The guys work when they want. They can work on their own cars when they want. And it's just a nice, relaxed atmosphere. But, all the credit goes to them.
Any advice for somebody that's just getting into this hobby?
I think the best advice is buy something that you can afford. I mean, I know that sounds obvious, but a lot of times guys will get a project where they're just way in over their head. I'll give you an example. When I was in the Tonight Show, I had interns, and one of them said, I'm a car guy. Oh, hey, nice to meet you. I said, do you have any classic cars? He goes, oh, yeah. I said, what do you have? He goes, a 91 Miata, which just made me laugh because to me, that's a new car. But he was only 20 years old. So that car was one. He was one, rather, when that car came out. So it just made me laugh. So to me, stuff like that, high schools don't really have vocational training anymore, which is kind of sad. I hate to see that go. I'm a great believer in working with your hands and learning a trade, welders, machinists. I have great respect for these guys. But that wasn't the question. The question was advice for them. Yeah, buy what you can afford and find an old guy. There are so many retired IndyCar mechanics. All these guys would love nothing better than to help a young person get a car back in shape and get it running again.
Jay, I love that idea, and I'll talk to you offline about that because Dave and I have had some conversations about something related to that. But I love the idea. I think all of us have been lucky to meet people in our lives that have given us education and passed on the knowledge that they have. Part of what makes the car hobby fun. You think all the people you've met over the years that have helped you in one way, shape, or form. Well, Jay, we really, really appreciate your time. I'd love to keep you here all day, but I know you got cars to work on and things to do. Thank you, Jay. Appreciate you joining us.
Thanks, guys.
This has been the On All Cylinders podcast.
Presented by Summit Racing.
Check out new episodes coming soon at OnAllCylinders.com.
OnAllCylinders.com.
Thanks for listening.
See you next time.